I never imagined that the worst day of my life would also become the most unexpected and powerful turning point I've ever lived. But that's exactly how life works when it decides to flip your soul inside out. Everything started the night my husband kicked me out of the house. And no, it wasn't a simple argument, the kind you fix the next morning. He literally put me on the street as if I were disposable. And, ironically, it was on that same night that I discovered a secret so shocking, so unbelievable, that sometimes I wonder if my father had been trying to warn me all along. Because everything changed the moment I found one of his old cards at the bottom of my bag. A worn-out card I didn't even remember having. All I wanted was to withdraw some money to survive that night. Just that. But when the bank employees saw my father's name, panic broke loose. They exchanged looks, called the manager in a rush, activated strange protocols, and I just stood there, frozen, with no idea what was happening. And maybe that's why I need to ask you something right at the start. Have you ever lived through something so unexpected that it made you feel like your life would never be the same again? If this story already grabbed you in the first few seconds, go ahead and hit the like button and subscribe, because what you're about to hear feels like a movie script, but I lived every second of it. And the most curious part? For years, I grew up believing my father was just a simple man, quiet, reserved, almost invisible in his own story. He never talked about money, never showed signs of wealth, never hinted at anything beyond the ordinary life we lived. But that night, when the bank froze just by typing in his name, I realized there was an entire hidden life behind his silence. I was devastated, homeless, directionless, emotionally shattered, and suddenly, I found myself at the center of a whirlwind that would reveal the greatest secret in my family, a secret my father kept for decades. And that's where the story truly begins. A story of pain, revelation, hidden wealth, and a rebirth I never imagined I would experience. But before we keep going, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I love knowing how far these stories travel, because mine is about to surprise you in every possible way. I still remember the sound of the door slamming behind me. It was so sudden, so violent, that for a second I thought the ground had cracked open beneath my feet. My husband kicked me out as if he were just shutting a cabinet door, without hesitation, without a tremor in his voice, without even looking twice at the woman who had shared years of her life with him. That moment burned itself into my memory in a strange way. It felt like I was watching my own life, like a terrible movie, one with no soundtrack and with a lost protagonist standing on the sidewalk holding a crooked suitcase. I took a long breath right there on the curb, trying to understand how everything had spiraled to that point, trying to organize thoughts that were messier than the clothes he had thrown out with me. And honestly, before we go on, if you feel connected to this story already, go ahead and subscribe to the channel and leave a like. This journey is just beginning, and what comes next? Well, it's jaw-dropping. As I walked aimlessly, I realized the pain didn't come only from the fact that he kicked me out. The pain came from how it happened. The coldness, the indifference, the silence that said more than any argument ever could. Deep down, we all imagine that the end, when it finally comes, is a storm. But sometimes it's just an icy breath, a short sentence, a quiet shove that breaks everything you believed in. I felt so small, but at the same time there was something inside me, a tiny spark insisting that this wasn't the end, that my story couldn't end the way he wanted. I had no idea that hitting such a low point would be the beginning of the biggest revelation of my life, something so surreal that, even today, I sometimes laugh alone when I remember it. The street looked darker than usual that night. Maybe it was just my perception. Maybe it was the weight of the moment, but everything felt distorted. I held the suitcase tightly, and with every step, my heart pounded harder, as if it were trying to warn me that something bigger was coming. It's strange how life stitches together little coincidences that only make sense later on. At that moment, all I could think about was where I was going to sleep, what I would do the next day, how I would rebuild my life without depending on anyone anymore, especially not a husband who never truly saw me. And yet, beneath all that sadness, there was a faint thread of strength pulling me forward, reminding me that I had survived worse than a broken heart. I sat down on a concrete bench near the square, hugged my knees, and let the cold wind sting my face. Sitting there, memories started coming back, all the small choices, the steps that had led me to that exact moment. Choices I made, choices he made, choices I accepted because I was afraid of being alone. When we love someone, we tolerate things we shouldn't, and when we finally wake up, it hurts, but it also frees, and I could feel that freedom starting to whisper inside me, quietly, subtly. I thought about how many women go through similar things, and how life sometimes pushes us harshly only to reveal a door we never knew existed. If you're going through something like this, breathe, really, because sometimes an ending is just a beginning, dressed like a tragedy. With the cold getting worse, I rummaged through my bag, searching for anything that could help me that night. That's when, hidden between crumpled papers, I found an old wallet. Inside it was a card I hadn't seen in years, my father's card, an old thing, worn, probably inactive. My father had always been a simple, quiet man. If someone had told me at that time that he had been a millionaire, anyone would have laughed, including me. He never showed anything, never talked about money, never gave a single clue that he had a secret life tucked away behind closed doors. I only learned much later that he was capable of hiding not only emotions, but entire fortunes. And holding that card in my hand changed something inside me. I didn't know then that this little piece of plastic carried an enormous secret. I just wanted a place to sleep, just a little money, whatever was left. I only hoped the card still had a few dollars, enough to get through the night. But what happened at the bank? That, yes, flipped my life upside down. And that moment marks the beginning of everything that came after. The moment when even the bank panicked just from seeing my father's name appear on their screen. When I found myself walking down the sidewalk with that half-open suitcase, I felt a tightness in my chest I can't fully describe. It's a strange sensation, realizing you no longer have a place called home. The world suddenly feels colder, bigger, emptier. I looked at the lit windows of the buildings around me, imagining how many families were having dinner together, how many people were arguing about silly things, how many were laughing, watching TV, living the normal life that, in that moment, felt like a luxury. My husband had kicked me out as if I were disposable, as if my presence had expired, and there I was, trying to understand how my life had collapsed in minutes. And before I forget, if this story is resonating with you, hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. The suitcase was heavy, but not as heavy as everything I was feeling. With each step, it felt like another part of my world was falling apart. It wasn't just the end of a relationship. It was the end of a dream, of a future I had imagined 1,000 times. It's incredible how the body reacts when we suddenly realize we're alone, not physically, but emotionally. That kind of loneliness creeps in quietly until it fills everything. The cold wind hitting my face felt like a mix between a slap and a wake-up call. It hurt, but it also kept me alert. I whispered to myself, "You need to find somewhere, anywhere." And that simple thought was the only thing keeping me moving. I kept walking with no destination, dragging the suitcase like a whole chapter of my life I didn't know how to close. For some strange reason, I remembered something my father used to say. Life finds a way when you no longer have one. He said it with this calmness that used to irritate me, a confidence as if he knew things no one else knew. Funny how those words came back to me in that moment. And now, knowing what I know, I realize he understood far more than he ever let on. Maybe he knew that silence can be protection. Maybe he knew that being a millionaire didn't mean you had to look like one. But that night, I still had no idea about any of that. All I knew was that I was alone, with a heavy suitcase and a fear that felt endless. Desperation really hit me when I checked my wallet and realized I didn't have enough money even for a cheap hotel. My empty card felt like it was mocking me every time I opened my purse. I even sat for a moment at a bus stop, but the wind cut through my jacket as if it were made of paper. I thought about calling someone. But who? Friends who drifted away over the years, relatives who lived too far, people who wouldn't understand what was happening. A knot formed in my throat so tight I had to stop walking and breathe. Sometimes we don't realize how isolated we've become until we need help. I sat down on the cold curb with the suitcase in my arms, trying to calm my racing mind. The street looked huge, the night endless. I tried to picture a plan, any plan, but my thoughts were so scattered, nothing made sense. Then, while searching for loose coins at the bottom of my purse, my fingers brushed against something forgotten. The card. My father's old, worn-out card. In that moment, I didn't think of wealth or secrets or anything big. I just thought, maybe there's a few dollars left on this thing. It was my last hope. I stood up with a little more determination, not because I believed in a miracle, but because desperation forces you forward. I walked toward the only bank nearby that still had a working ATM, and as I walked, something shifted in me. Not hope, intuition. As if something deep inside already knew that card would change everything. I just wanted enough for a warm place to sleep, nothing more. But what happened inside the bank? That was the moment everything flipped, and I had no idea I was about to discover the first clue of the enormous secret my father had hidden his whole life. That cold night, while I desperately searched through my bag for anything that could help me survive, my fingers touched something I had almost forgotten existed. It felt like finding an old photograph from a moment you barely remember. A card, old, worn around the edges, with my father's name printed in fading letters. A strange sensation rose in my chest, a mix of nostalgia, fear, and comfort all at once. My father had always been a quiet, reserved man, the kind who hid more in silence than most people reveal in words. If someone had told me back then that he had been a millionaire, I would have laughed in disbelief. He never lived like one. He never hinted at anything extravagant. He was like a shadow, warm but discreet, present but mysterious. Holding that card took me back to childhood memories. I remembered how he used to store things in old boxes inside his closet, as if each object were a secret treasure. Sometimes he'd gently close the lid and say, "Some things are only meant to be discovered at the right time." Back then, I thought he meant love letters, old photos, maybe sentimental stuff. I had no idea he might have been talking about something much bigger. Sitting there, in the middle of the night with my life falling apart, that card felt like more than an object. It felt like a whisper from him. And if this story is pulling you in, go ahead and like the video and subscribe. Trust me, what's coming next will surprise you even more. The moment I held the card, something shifted inside me. Not hope exactly, but a sense of direction. My father had passed away years before, yet in that moment it felt like he was guiding me again, the way he used to when I scraped my knee or got scared of thunderstorms. Funny how the smallest objects can feel incredibly meaningful when everything else is falling apart. I didn't know if the card still worked. For all I knew, the account could have been closed decades ago. But desperation makes you believe in the tiniest possibilities. I wasn't thinking about wealth. I just needed enough money for a warm place to stay, just enough to survive that night. As I walked toward the bank, clutching the card in my hand, it felt like an amulet, not magical, but familiar. Memories of my father kept flooding in. His late-night habits, the way he'd sit quietly, reading documents I never understood, times when he'd hide papers in boxes and lock them away, saying they were for the future. I never questioned him. I never thought there was anything unusual. He lived like a simple man, a humble man, someone who would never even consider showing off money, let alone having a secret stash no one knew about. And yet, there I was, wondering for the first time if my father had lived an entirely different life beneath the surface. When I reached the bank, a chill ran down my spine, not from the cold, but from something deeper. There was a strange feeling in my gut, a sense that something unexpected was about to happen. I inserted the card into the ATM with trembling hands. I entered the old PIN he had taught me when I was a teenager, a PIN I remembered more out of affection than memory. And the machine didn't reject it. Instead, it displayed a strange message: "Please contact a bank representative." My heart dropped. Why would an old, likely inactive card trigger that? I stood there for a few seconds, unsure if I should walk away or push forward. But I knew one thing. Nothing in my life had gone right that night. I had nothing else to lose. I took the card out, swallowed my fear, and walked toward the tiny 24-hour service room where a sleepy employee sat behind the glass. I had no idea that handing him that card would set off a chain reaction so bizarre it would flip my entire world upside down. I didn't know it yet, but that simple act, handing over an old forgotten card, would be the first step toward uncovering the biggest secret my father ever kept. When I stepped into the bank that night, it felt like walking into a cold, silent temple, the kind that forces your thoughts to whisper. The automatic door slid open slowly, as if it were questioning whether I deserved to enter. I held my suitcase in one hand and my father's old card in the other, trying to ignore the fear crawling through my body like cold water. The whole atmosphere felt too organized, too calm, too distant from the chaos my life had turned into. If this story has you hooked so far, go ahead and hit the like button and subscribe, because believe me, things are about to get much more intense. The security cameras followed me as I walked, and for a brief second I almost laughed at the irony. That bank had probably seen everything: fraud attempts, fights, desperate clients. But I doubt it had ever seen what was about to happen next. And honestly, neither had I. My legs felt unsteady as I approached the ATM. I tried to take a deep breath, but even my breath felt stuck halfway. My whole body knew, in some strange, instinctive way, that this night wouldn't be ordinary. All I wanted was a little money, just enough to get me through the night my husband kicked me out like I meant nothing. I inserted the card again. My hands trembled, not because of the card itself, but because of the uncertainty that came with it. I typed the PIN my father once taught me, praying that the machine would recognize something, anything. But instead of showing a balance, the screen flashed a message I'd never seen before. Please see a bank attendant. My stomach dropped. That wasn't normal. Not for a closed account, not for an old card, not for anything that made sense at 3 a.m. I considered leaving, facing the cold outside, sleeping on a bench, anything, but I knew I couldn't. Not when this was my last chance. I grabbed my suitcase and made my way to the small 24-hour service room, that eerie, overly bright little space where one single, bored employee keeps watch. He had that tired look of someone who has seen every type of problem imaginable. I explained what happened, and he took the card from me with an expression as neutral as a blank wall. He typed a few numbers, then a few more, then frowned. That's when everything changed. Before he even spoke, I could feel it. Something was wrong. Very wrong. He stared at the screen like it had just revealed a ghost standing behind him. Without saying a single word, he stood up abruptly and disappeared through a side door. A few minutes later, he returned, but he wasn't alone. 2 more employees followed him. They all crowded around the computer, whispering rapidly, exchanging panicked glances. One of them even called someone on a small internal phone. Their eyes shifted between the monitor and me in a way that made my skin prickle. This wasn't about an inactive card. This wasn't a normal error. This was something else, something big, something none of them expected. And the worst part? I had absolutely no clue what I had just triggered. Finally, the oldest employee approached me and asked for my full name, my date of birth, my father's name, our relationship, everything. His voice was steady, but his eyes weren't. He typed my information slowly, cautiously, as if each letter might activate some hidden alarm. Then they all looked at the screen at the same time and stepped back, actually stepped back, like the numbers on that screen were dangerous. That's when the older man swallowed hard and said, "The manager is on her way down. Not protocol, not routine, urgent, immediate, serious." And at that moment, standing in that cold, bright room, I realized that my father's old card wasn't just still active. It was the doorway to something enormous, something that neither I nor the bank was prepared for. The moment the manager walked in, the whole atmosphere of the room shifted. It was subtle, but unmistakable, like the air got heavier, like everyone suddenly sat up straighter. She wasn't dressed like someone who had just rolled out of bed at 3 a.m. No, her posture, her expression, her sharp eyes, everything about her said she was someone who handled serious situations, and they had called her for me. For an old card I barely remembered existed. My heart hammered in my chest as she walked closer, her heels clicking softly on the tile floor, echoing louder than they should. If this story is keeping you on the edge, go ahead and like the video and subscribe. Trust me, what's coming is even more unbelievable. She glanced at me first, an analyzing look, the kind you feel under your skin, then at the employees, who stepped aside to give her access to the computer. When she typed the account details, something changed in her face. Not shock exactly, but recognition. Recognition mixed with caution. She knew something. She knew exactly whose card that was, and whatever she saw confirmed it instantly. Her expression went serious. Not cold, not rude, just deeply focused. Then she turned to me and asked in the calmest voice, "Can you come with me, please?" It wasn't a request. It was a decision already made. I followed her down a hallway so silent it felt like the lights themselves were holding their breath. She unlocked a private office, gestured for me to sit, and closed the door gently behind us. It was such a quiet, careful movement that it made everything feel 10 times more serious. She sat across from me, folded her hands on the desk, and looked me straight in the eyes. There was no pity in her expression, but there was something else. Respect, concern, maybe both. I felt like a child sitting in front of a principal, except this wasn't about discipline. This was about secrets, heavy ones. The first thing she said was, "I need to verify some information about your father." My stomach twisted. Why would a bank manager need to verify information about a man who had died years ago? She asked his full name, his date of birth, the street we lived on when I was a kid. Questions that seemed simple on the surface, but the way she asked them made everything feel deeper, more layered. And then she said something that made my skin crawl. "Your father left specific instructions regarding this account." I froze. My father? Instructions? For a card I didn't even know still existed. She pulled out a sealed envelope from a drawer, one with an official stamp. She didn't open it. She didn't explain it. She simply placed it on the desk and stared at it for a moment before saying, "This card should not have been used unless something significant had happened." I felt my throat tighten. Something significant, like my husband kicking me out, like me having nowhere to go, like my life falling apart in one night. How could he have known? How could he have prepared for something like this? When she finally showed me the first glimpse of the account information, her tone became almost protective. "Your father was not who you thought he was," she said quietly, and those words hit me like a punch, not because they were harsh, but because I felt them deeply. She said there were protocols, levels, permissions, words that shouldn't be associated with a simple man who lived a modest life. But suddenly, everything made sense. The secrecy, the silence, the habits, the boxes he hid, the look he sometimes had when he thought I wasn't watching. And sitting there in that freezing office, with fluorescent lights buzzing above me, I realized something that would change the course of everything that came next. If the bank was panicking, it was because my father had lived an entire life I knew nothing about, and that life, that hidden life, was about to collide with mine in a way I never could have predicted. The moment the manager started typing again, a strange tension filled the room, a tension so thick it felt like the air had turned to glass. I watched her eyes move across the screen, widening just enough for me to understand that whatever she was seeing wasn't normal, not even close. She leaned forward, whispered something to one of the employees, and suddenly, no one in that room was breathing normally anymore. They weren't looking at me as a customer. They were looking at me as if I had just walked in carrying a secret bomb I didn't know existed. And honestly, that feeling alone was enough to make my hands start shaking. One of the employees, a younger guy with nervous energy, stepped away from the desk and made a phone call. He kept glancing at me, then at the computer, then back at me again, like he was trying to solve a puzzle that didn't fit together. The manager herself took a slow breath, straightened her posture, and said, "Miss, we need a moment." Her voice wasn't harsh. It was careful, too careful. My heart felt like it was trying to escape through my ribs. And if this story is gripping you so far, don't forget to like and subscribe, because none of us were ready for what happened next. They moved me to a separate room, a quiet one, too quiet. The kind of room banks use only when something extremely delicate is unfolding behind the scenes. I sat down, hugging my jacket, while the staff gathered outside the glass door, whispering urgently. I could see their silhouettes, tense and confused. They weren't acting like people who had found a high balance. This wasn't about money. This was about protocol, and that realization hit me with a chill that climbed up my spine and settled in the base of my skull. A few minutes later, 2 more employees arrived, both wearing badges that looked different from the others. They checked the system as well, and the moment they saw the account details, their expressions shifted instantly. Fear, respect, shock. I wasn't sure, but it was something powerful, something real. One of them looked at me through the glass with an expression I'll never forget. Recognition, not of me, but of my father's name. It felt like all the oxygen had left the room. Who exactly had he been? Finally, the manager returned and closed the door behind her with a slow, almost ritualistic motion. She sat across from me, folded her hands, and exhaled, as if she had been holding her breath for 10 minutes. "I need to explain something to you," she said softly. My heart was pounding. I nodded. "There are accounts that trigger internal protocols when accessed improperly. Accounts linked to individuals with special statuses." She hesitated, and that hesitation said more than any explanation could. I swallowed hard, trying to understand. My father, special status? A man who fixed radios in the living room and read the newspaper in silence every morning. A man who taught me to save coins in a jar. She continued, "This account is categorized at a level that requires immediate escalation. Only a handful of people in the institution have access to it." It felt like a punch to my chest. The room tilted slightly. I managed to whisper, "Why?" She looked at me with a mix of empathy and caution. "Because your father wasn't just a client. He was a protected individual, and the information tied to this account goes far beyond the financial system." I felt my whole world shifting. Everything I thought I knew about my father, the simple life, the modest habits, the quiet routines, suddenly blurred into something else entirely, something bigger, something I wasn't prepared for. And while I sat there in that silent, freezing room, surrounded by people who seemed to know more about my father than I ever did, I realized something terrifying. That old card wasn't just a forgotten relic. It was a key, and it had just opened a door I didn't even know existed. The manager sat across from me with an expression that held a strange mixture of concern and certainty, as if she had known from the moment she saw the account that this conversation would be difficult. She started slowly, choosing every word with extreme care, and somehow that made everything feel even heavier. "Before we proceed," she said, "I need to confirm a few personal details about your father." My pulse quickened. I tried to prepare myself, but nothing could have prepared me for the direction this night was about to take. The way she looked at me. It wasn't the look of someone doing routine verification. It was the look of someone preparing me for impact. She asked his full name first. I answered. She nodded, but it wasn't a normal nod. It was a nod of confirmation, like the final puzzle piece sliding into place. "Do you know if your father ever worked with international institutions?" The question punched the air out of my lungs. My father? International institutions? He fixed old radios and repaired neighbors' toasters. He read the newspaper on the couch every morning. He wore the same watch for 15 years. Nothing about him screamed international connections. I shook my head. Not that I know of. But as soon as I said that, a strange discomfort crawled up my neck. What did I know? Then came the second question, and it was even stranger. Did your father ever mention having guardianship responsibilities or protected assets? My brow furrowed. Guardianship responsibilities. Protected what? She leaned back, studying my reaction carefully, as if trying to determine whether I truly had no idea, or if I was pretending. I wasn't. I was genuinely lost, completely. "No," I said firmly. "He never mentioned anything like that. My father was simple." But even as the word simple left my mouth, it felt wrong. Something about the night, about the card, about the panic in that room. Everything screamed that my father had never been simple. He had simply been silent. The manager took another slow breath. "Your father placed strict conditions on this account," she explained. "It is one of the highest level classifications we have, meaning access is restricted, monitored, and protected. Protected. Protected." That word kept echoing in my mind like a riddle. Protected from what? From who? I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. Protected why? I whispered. She hesitated again, and her hesitation terrified me more than any answer. I can't disclose everything tonight, she said, but I can tell you this. Your father wasn't just hiding money. He was hiding a life. My head dropped for a moment as reality began shifting around me. All my memories of him, the quiet meals, the afternoons in the backyard, the way he always seemed to be lost in thought, took on new shapes. Had he been protecting me? Had he been protecting himself? Had he been protecting something bigger? Questions flooded my mind faster than I could process them. Everything I thought I knew about him suddenly felt like a cover story. The manager's tone softened. I know this is overwhelming, but I need you to understand. Nothing about this account is ordinary. Your father set up systems we rarely see, layers of security, instructions for specific scenarios, and it seems tonight triggered one of them. Triggered. The word hit me hard. Triggered by what? By me using the card? By the fact that my husband expelled me from home? By the timing? I didn't know yet, but I felt it. This was only the beginning. She handed me a small folder, thin, sealed, labeled with my father's name. For you, she said quietly. He wanted you to have this if the day ever came. And in that moment, holding that envelope, everything inside me whispered the same truth. My father had lived a life I never saw, and now, whether I was ready or not, I was stepping directly into it. The manager placed the folder on the table gently, almost with reverence, as if whatever was inside carried a weight that demanded respect. I stared at it, feeling my pulse in my throat, unsure whether to open it or to run away from everything that was happening. She kept her calm posture, but her eyes revealed something I couldn't ignore. She wasn't just following protocol. She was being careful, deliberately careful. There's something you need to understand before we move forward, she said. Her voice was steady, but there was an undertone of tension that made my skin crawl. Your father's account is not like any normal account. Access to it is restricted at multiple levels. For a moment, I just blinked, as if my brain couldn't process what she was telling me. Restricted? Multiple levels? My father? The man who fixed broken radios and read the same newspaper every morning? I swallowed hard. Restricted how? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she shifted in her seat and intertwined her fingers, like she was preparing me for something much bigger than I could imagine. This account doesn't behave like a standard financial profile, she finally said. It has internal locks, encrypted sections, and alerts tied to specific personal events. Personal events. The words slammed into me like ice water. I leaned back, feeling the cold leather of the chair against my spine. I don't understand, I whispered. Why would my father need something so complicated? She studied me again, that same deep, searching look she'd given me since the moment she saw his name appear on the screen. Because he wasn't just protecting his money, she said softly. He was protecting you. And that was the moment my confusion turned into fear. A slow, creeping fear that wrapped itself around my chest and refused to let go. Protecting me from what? She continued, her tone now more direct. There are people, very few, who create accounts designed to activate protocols in case their children ever need emergency access. Your father was one of them. My father, a man who always told me we didn't have much. A man who lived in a small house, ate simple meals, and never bought anything unnecessary. He had created an account with emergency activation protocols. It sounded insane, impossible. And yet, here I was. I ran my fingers over the edge of the folder, feeling its weight. The room felt cold, too cold, like someone had opened a window I couldn't see. What does that even mean? I asked, my voice barely audible. She took a slow breath before answering, the kind of breath people take before saying something important. It means your father anticipated a situation where you might be vulnerable, where you might be left alone, where you might need access to things he never wanted to expose during his lifetime. My chest tightened. A heaviness settled in my stomach, because despite everything, despite my confusion, despite the absurdity of it all, a small part of me understood exactly what she meant. Then she said the sentence that echoed in my mind long after that night. Your father left instructions saying this account should only be accessed when something significant happened in your life. My throat closed. something significant, like my husband kicking me out, like me having nowhere to go, like the universe imploding around me on the same night I touched his card again. I looked at the manager, feeling the terror of a truth I hadn't fully grasped yet. "Something significant happened," she said softly, "and that's why the system unlocked." I felt tears burning behind my eyes. Not grief, a deeper kind of fear. The fear of realizing I had known nothing about the man who raised me, but also a strange feeling of being held, guided, protected by him long after he was gone. And with that thought, I knew this was only the beginning of the truth I was about to uncover. The manager's words kept echoing in my mind long after she'd stopped speaking. "Your father wasn't just protecting his money, he was protecting you." That sentence alone felt like someone had cracked open a hidden door inside my chest, a door I didn't even know was there. I looked down at the folder resting in my hands, and for the first time, I felt something I never expected to feel that night. Doubt. Not doubt about the bank, or the card, or the situation, but doubt about my own memories. Who exactly was my father? Who had I grown up with? Had I really known him? Or had I only known the version he allowed me to see? For as long as I could remember, my father had lived quietly, almost invisibly. He worked simple jobs, fixed appliances for neighbors, helped people without ever accepting anything in return. He wore the same watch for years, the same jacket every winter, the same calm smile whenever I asked about his day. He never bragged, never complained, never revealed anything beyond what was absolutely necessary. He was the definition of humble. But now I was beginning to realize that humility and secrecy aren't the same thing. Humble people hide pride. Secretive people hide worlds. As I sat there in that cold room, under the humming fluorescent lights, pieces of my childhood began resurfacing like old photos dipped in water. I remembered the nights he stayed awake reading documents I wasn't allowed to touch, the boxes he kept hidden in his closet, heavy wooden ones with metal locks, the phone calls he'd step outside to take, speaking in that low tone that made me think he was discussing bills or errands. I remembered how he always changed the subject when I asked about his youth, or his work, or his travels, and suddenly, all those small memories started to feel like clues I had ignored. The manager's voice broke through my thoughts. "Your father wasn't living a simple life," she said gently. "He was living a protected life." Protected. That word again. It rattled something inside me. What was he protecting himself from? Or worse, what was he protecting me from? The fear that took over me wasn't loud. It was quiet, cold, creeping up my spine like a slow-burning truth. Because if my father had gone to such extreme lengths to hide his identity and his fortune, then the reality was simple. I had grown up inside a story I didn't understand. I ran my fingers over the envelope seal, feeling its texture. I wasn't ready to open it yet. My heart wouldn't let me. "Why didn't he tell me?" I whispered. The manager hesitated before answering, and that hesitation pierced me. "Maybe he wanted you to live freely," she said, "without fear, without pressure, without the weight of what he knew." Her words hit me hard, because deep down, I knew she was right. My father had raised me with love, stability, and quiet strength, but always kept his past locked away. Not because he didn't trust me, but because he wanted to protect me from a world I didn't even know existed. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how much effort he must have put into maintaining that double life, how much discipline it took, how much sacrifice, and as painful as it was to admit, he had succeeded, completely. I never suspected a thing, not once. And now, all those ordinary moments, the simple dinners, the quiet mornings, the long silences, suddenly felt layered with meanings I had never seen before. He hadn't been hiding from me. He had been shielding me. Sitting there with that envelope in my lap, I felt a mix of fear, awe, and heartbreak. The truth was clear. My father wasn't who I thought he was. He had lived another life hidden between the folds of the one I knew, a life I was about to uncover piece by piece. And although I was terrified, I also felt something else rising inside me, something powerful, electric. The sense that everything I believed about my past was about to be rewritten, and the next step would change everything. When the manager returned with a thicker folder and set it gently on the desk, I felt the air shift again, heavier, more charged, like the room itself knew I was about to face something I had never imagined. She sat down slowly, almost respectfully, as if she were about to deliver news that carried emotional weight. And she was. My heartbeat thudded so loudly I could hear it in my ears. "Your father didn't have just one account," she began softly. Her words cut through me like cold water. "What do you mean?" I asked. She exchanged a glance with another employee standing near the door, a glance that said more than any explanation. "Your father built a system," she clarified. "Not a bank balance. A system." I blinked, confused. A system? My father? The man who collected old keys and fixed broken appliances in the garage? But as she began explaining, reality slowly rearranged itself inside me. She told me my father had investments in different countries, accounts connected through silent networks, holdings that had grown over decades. Nothing flashy, nothing attention-grabbing. Everything structured quietly, strategically, almost invisibly, exactly like the man he had always been. He understood long-term growth better than most wealthy clients, she said. Wealthy clients. Hearing that word associated with my father felt surreal, like she was describing a stranger wearing his face. As she continued, pieces of my childhood suddenly made sense in ways they never had before. I remembered the books he used to read, thick books about global markets, history, economics. I remembered how he always listened, more than he talked, how he studied trends quietly at night. At the time, I thought it was just curiosity, a passing interest. I didn't know those books were tools. That silence was strategy. That simplicity was protection. My father had built his empire the way he lived his life, quietly, patiently, deliberately. He wasn't the kind of millionaire who flaunted anything. He was the kind who hid everything. The manager went on to explain that many of his investments were structured to grow automatically, self-sustaining mechanisms he had set up years ago, engines that kept running even after he was gone. "That's why the system reacted the way it did," she said. "It wasn't just the amount, it was the complexity." I felt a lump rising in my throat. The complexity. My father, the man who walked me to school holding my backpack for me, had built a financial structure so sophisticated the bank barely knew how to handle it. And the strangest feeling washed over me. Pride. Not pride in the money, but pride in the brilliance of the man who raised me. My father had been extraordinary, and he never once used it to intimidate or impress me. He had chosen humility. He had chosen silence. He had chosen to teach me strength without revealing the safety net he'd built beneath my feet. Then came the part that hit the deepest. As the manager explained how everything was organized, how some accounts haven't been touched in years, yet continued to grow, she paused and looked at me with a softness I didn't expect. "He set this up intentionally," she said. "For you, for a moment, when you would truly need it." And that's when the realization crashed over me like a wave. The same night, my husband expelled me from home. The same night I felt worthless, abandoned, discarded, was the night my father's plan finally revealed itself. It was as if he had known, not details, not events, but something deeper, that one day I would face a storm strong enough to break me, and he built a fortress for me long before I ever needed it. The manager closed the folder with a quiet sigh and looked at me with a gravity that made my eyes sting. "I can't show you everything yet," she said gently, "but I can assure you, your father knew exactly what he was doing." And in that moment, it felt like he was there with me, not in a mystical way, but in the way truth brings someone back to life. I realized I had never truly known the man behind the father, and now, for the first time, the door to his hidden world was opening. What waited behind it was bigger than anything I could have imagined. When the manager stepped out of the room to retrieve more documents, I stayed there alone, staring at my hands resting on the table, hands that had been trembling since the moment I walked into the bank. Hands that now carried the weight of a reality I never imagined facing. For the first time in my life, the silence around me felt meaningful, like it was giving space for a hidden truth to finally surface. And it was in that silence that a realization hit me so hard it almost knocked the air out of my lungs. My father spent his entire life protecting me from this money, not hiding it out of greed, not keeping secrets out of pride. He was shielding me from the world, from danger, and maybe even from myself. I remembered our conversations with a new sense of clarity, the way he insisted I learn to stand on my own feet, how he taught me to value effort over comfort, how he avoided giving me anything that felt too easy. He used to say, "What you earn yourself stays with you longer." At the time, I thought he was teaching me humility. Now I understood he was preparing me to be strong without relying on wealth, preparing me to trust myself before trusting money. And the irony wasn't lost on me. The very night my husband expelled me, destroying what little confidence I still had, was the night I discovered the truth my father had hidden all along. If this journey is resonating with you, make sure to like this video and subscribe, because what comes next goes even deeper. As more memories surfaced, they suddenly took on new meaning. Like the time I asked him for help to buy a better car, and he gently refused, telling me I needed to feel the pride of earning things the hard way. Or the time he made me turn down a job offer that seemed perfect, and later, I discovered it was a scam. He had instincts sharper than anyone I ever knew. And now, looking back, I realized he had been preparing me for people like my husband, people who take advantage of vulnerability, people who thrive when you don't know your own worth. It hurt to admit, but it became painfully clear. My father saw things long before I did. What hurt the most was knowing he never got to see how everything turned out. He never saw the moment my husband kicked me out without hesitation, a moment that broke me in ways I didn't even know were possible. But somehow, it felt like he knew a moment like that would come. Not the specifics, not the cruelty, but the emotional magnitude of it. And that's why he built this system, not for me to use while he was alive, but for me to find when I was at my lowest, when I had nothing left, when I needed strength more than I needed comfort. That was the moment he prepared me for, long before I ever knew it existed. When the manager returned with a thick folder in her hands, I felt drenched in a wave of gratitude so overwhelming that I had to blink back tears. She placed the folder on the table with a kind of respectful softness, as if she understood what it represented. Not wealth, but love. Deep, careful, strategic love. I looked at the papers she handed me, but my mind was somewhere else entirely. With him. With the man who taught me how to tie my shoes, who fixed my broken toys, who sat quietly beside me when I cried. And now I understood that every quiet moment, every silence, every hesitation was part of something much bigger. The manager started explaining more details, but I already knew the truth that mattered most. My father wasn't keeping money from me. He was keeping me safe. He wasn't hiding wealth. He was hiding the world that comes with it. And now, without him here, I was the one who had to step into that world, not blindly, but stronger, wiser, and more resilient than ever. And that realization didn't just change how I saw him, it changed how I saw myself. And what came next would only reinforce that transformation. If someone had told me that the same day my husband kicked me out of the house would be the day I discovered the greatest turning point of my life, I would have laughed or cried, maybe both. The truth is, when he threw me out, I felt like the world had collapsed around me. My self-esteem, my dignity, my sense of direction, everything shattered at once. He didn't just close the door, he closed an entire version of me. But sitting in that bank, listening to the manager explain the empire my father had built in silence, I realized something profound. Maybe I had lost nothing. Maybe I was being redirected. And that realization sparked something inside me I hadn't felt in years. I closed my eyes for a moment and remembered the cold way my husband spoke to me before he expelled me. The indifference, the tired tone, the way he looked at me like I was a burden. And the saddest part, I believed it. I believed I wasn't enough, that I was the problem, that I was too emotional, too weak. But now, sitting there with the truth about my father unfolding before me, something began to shift. I felt like pieces of myself I had forgotten were slowly returning. It was as if the version of me that he had tried to break was starting to rebuild itself, stronger, wiser, clearer. If this story is hitting deep, make sure to like the video and subscribe, because the shift that comes next, it's powerful. As the manager laid out more documents, explaining protocols, access rights, and the structure my father had created, I felt caught between two worlds. One was the world of the woman who sat on a cold sidewalk with a suitcase after her husband expelled her. The other was the world of a woman whose father had left behind a powerful, carefully constructed legacy, a legacy designed to lift me up at the exact moment I'd fallen the hardest. And for the first time in so long, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like someone standing at the edge of a transformation, someone reborn from her own brokenness. It's strange how pain and strength often grow in the exact same place. While my husband spent years telling me I was too sensitive, too emotional, too unfocused, my father, even after death, was telling me something completely different. He was telling me I was capable, intentional, strong. He was telling me that I had not inherited fragility. I had inherited strategy, perspective, courage. My husband tried to shrink me. My father had spent years preparing the world where I would grow. The contrast between the two felt like a slap of truth I desperately needed. And then came the second part of that emotional turning point, the realization of power. Not money power, but inner power. The kind that comes when you finally understand that you are enough, that you always were. I looked around that bank office and realized I wasn't the same woman who had arrived there trembling. I was someone who had been underestimated her entire life. But now, for the first time, I saw my own worth clearly. My father saw it long before I did. He knew I would need this moment. He knew I would need strength. He knew I would need a way out of the life I was living, a life built on someone else's insecurities. When I returned to the small room I had rented, the same room that felt like defeat the night before, it no longer felt like a place of desperation. It felt like a transition, a beginning. I bought some clothes, ate a decent meal, took a long shower, and felt my mind settling into a new reality. This wasn't just about inheriting money. This was about inheriting myself, about reclaiming the woman I had lost while trying to love someone who didn't know how to love me back. And as I sat there, breathing deeply, I realized this was only the first step, because what came next wasn't just about accessing my father's legacy. It was about understanding it, and that journey would reveal even more than I expected. When the manager finally handed me the first documents I was officially allowed to access, it felt like I wasn't just holding papers. I was holding a new life, a life I never expected, a life I never imagined would be mine. Hours earlier, my husband had expelled me from our home as if my existence meant nothing. Now I was sitting in a bank office being told I had access to a legacy that could rebuild everything he tried to destroy. My heart was pounding. But for the first time in a long while, it wasn't from fear. It was from possibility. I had no idea yet how enormous my father's fortune really was. But just knowing it existed already changed everything inside me. Stepping out of the bank that first night felt surreal. I walked slowly, almost as if my body needed time to adjust to the new reality. The cold air hit my face differently, not harshly, but like a reminder that I had survived something brutal and was still standing. My suitcase, which hours earlier felt like the symbol of my humiliation, now felt like a symbol of resilience, of movement, of leaving behind a story that no longer fit me. And the irony wasn't lost on me. The man who expelled me thought he had ended my life, when in reality he had pushed me directly into the truth my father had prepared for me all along. And hey, if this journey is resonating with you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. The story is just getting started. The next day, when I returned to the bank for more signatures and verifications, something had shifted inside me. I wasn't walking with my head down anymore. I wasn't apologizing for taking up space. I entered that building with dignity, real dignity, the kind you don't get from money, but from awakening. The manager greeted me differently, too, not with pity, not with formality, but with genuine respect. Respect for someone who had endured something painful and was now stepping into a new chapter with courage. As she explained the systems, accounts, and authorizations, I realized something important. Nothing my father did was random. He built every layer of his wealth with intention, and now all of that intention had landed in my hands. Then came the moment I saw the first numbers. Not the entire fortune, just the first accessible portion. But even that alone was enough to make my breath hitch. It wasn't simply a lot of money. It was life-changing money. Money that could rewrite destinies. Money that revealed my father had been a millionaire in silence for decades. A tear rolled down my cheek, not because of greed or shock, but because of love. Love for the man who never flaunted anything, who never made me feel small, who never used wealth as a weapon. He protected me with silence instead of status. With those first accessible funds, my life began stabilizing quickly. I rented a small room to stay in temporarily, and suddenly even that felt like a blessing. Not luxury, safety, freedom. I bought a few clothes, a decent phone, and sat down for my first warm meal in what felt like forever. People don't realize how valuable the simplest things are until they lose everything in one night. Just having a bed to sleep in, a door to lock, a moment to breathe, it all felt like gold. But beyond comfort, what I felt most was responsibility. I didn't want to waste what my father built. I wanted to honor it, understand it, grow it. And that's when something inside me snapped into place. Like a puzzle piece I'd been missing my whole life. I didn't want to just receive the inheritance. I wanted to know it, to understand every hidden corner of what my father left behind. The documents, the investments, the encrypted instructions. I wanted to uncover not only the fortune, but the man behind it. Who he really was, what he did, why he hid everything so carefully. And as that desire grew inside me, I realized I was standing at the doorway of something much bigger than wealth. I was standing at the doorway of truth, and the next steps would reveal more than I ever imagined. Life has a twisted sense of irony, almost like it enjoys making the truth show up wearing the most uncomfortable shoes. It didn't take long for my husband, the same man who expelled me without hesitation, without compassion, without a second thought, to suddenly reappear as if nothing had happened. I don't know how he found out about my inheritance, but the shift in his attitude was so drastic, it felt almost theatrical. First, he sent a short message, pretending to be worried. I stared at the screen and felt something strange. Not sadness, not longing, clarity. He wasn't worried. He was calculating. The next day, he tried calling. Then came a long voice message filled with, "I was upset. I didn't mean it. Everyone makes mistakes." And the classic, "No one deserves to sleep outside." Funny how he didn't think that when he threw me out, listening to his voice didn't hurt like I expected. Instead, it felt like watching someone else's story, a version of me I no longer identified with. Because something profound had happened since that night. I wasn't the same woman he expelled. Understanding my father's secret, discovering the legacy he left, reconnecting with my own strength, it all changed me. His words didn't pull me back, they pushed me forward. And if this part of the story is hitting home, go ahead and like the video and subscribe. What comes next reveals even more than you expect. And then, of course, he showed up in person. Standing at the door of the small room I had rented, he looked at me with a rehearsed expression, the same look he used whenever he needed forgiveness without actually apologizing. But this time, nothing in me reacted the way it used to. I wasn't trembling. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't trying to fix things. I was simply observing. He tried to hug me, and I stepped back. He tried to hold my hand, and I kept my arms at my sides. It wasn't anger. It wasn't revenge. It was just the realization that I no longer belonged in the version of myself that tolerated him. He began his speech, full of nostalgia, regret, longing, sudden realizations about us, but every word sounded hollow, empty, convenient, because none of this was about love. It was about money. It was about him losing control. It was about him finally seeing value in me only when he thought I had something he could benefit from. And that realization was liberating. Because for the first time, I could see clearly what my father had tried to protect me from my whole life. People who only draw close when they smell opportunity. People who don't love you, they love what you can give them. I listened quietly, letting him talk, letting him paint the fantasy of a reunion he never deserved. But inside, I felt nothing but peace. Real peace, the kind that comes when you finally understand your worth. He tried to twist the narrative, tried to make himself look like a man who acted out of emotion, out of stress, out of confusion, anything but accountability. But the truth was simple. He had never valued me, and now he couldn't manipulate a woman who had found her strength. Eventually, When he realized his charm wasn't working, his expression changed. The fear slipped through the cracks, a mix of panic and frustration. And that moment, that exact moment, was when I knew I had made the right choice. I wasn't going back, not to him, not to that life, not to that version of me. As he left, defeated, I felt a deep, sacred sense of freedom settling in my chest. Because now, I wasn't just leaving a man. I was leaving the prison he had built around my confidence. And little did I know, the next chapter of my life would require even more courage. Because discovering the truth was only the beginning. The real transformation was still ahead. Returning to my father's old house felt like stepping into a memory I had avoided for too long. The door creaked the same way it used to, the same familiar sound that once told me I was home. But this time, the meaning was different. Before, this place had been a symbol of simplicity, of a humble life lived quietly. Now, it felt like the entrance to a mystery, a vault of secrets I had never known existed. As I crossed the threshold, I felt my chest tighten, a mix of nostalgia and anticipation swirling inside me. The house smelled the same, old wood, dust, and a hint of the coffee he used to brew every morning. But now every detail felt loaded, charged, waiting to be understood. I walked through the living room slowly, almost reverently. The old clock still hung crooked on the wall, ticking with the same stubborn rhythm. The worn-out armchair where he always sat was still in the corner, untouched, as if he'd stepped out for a moment and might return any time. But this time, I saw everything differently. Every object, every crack, every drawer felt like it might hold a piece of the truth he never told me. I ran my fingers along the shelves, touching the books he used to read. Thick volumes about economics, history, world markets. Books I once thought were boring, but now they were clues. And if this story is pulling you in, go ahead and like the video and subscribe, because what I found next changed everything. I made my way to his room, the room he rarely let me enter. Not out of secrecy, or maybe it had been secrecy all along, but because he always said it was his thinking place. Standing at the doorway, I felt a lump rise in my throat. The room looked exactly as he left it. Neat, orderly, intentionally simple. But there was something strange about its simplicity, something almost staged, like the surface had been designed to distract from what truly mattered. The walls were plain, the bed neatly made, the desk cleared, except for one drawer, a drawer that was slightly open. My hands shook as I approached it. I don't know if it was fear, excitement, or the overwhelming feeling that I was about to uncover something huge. I pulled the drawer open slowly. Inside, there were envelopes, thick ones, sealed, and notebooks filled with handwriting I recognized instantly. His handwriting. The same handwriting that filled my childhood birthday cards with quiet affection. But these notebooks didn't hold memories or sentimental thoughts. They held numbers, plans, strategies, maps, dates, names I didn't recognize. My breath caught in my throat. My father had lived a double life, and this was the proof. I sat on the edge of his bed, flipping through the pages carefully. Every line felt like a confession. He had investments in places I'd never heard of, notes written about people he trusted, and people he didn't. Detailed plans dated back years, even decades. He had predicted economic changes, market crashes, opportunities, risks. It was like reading the journal of someone who had seen the world from an entirely different angle, someone brilliant enough to stay invisible. With every page, I understood more. He wasn't silent because he had nothing to say. He was silent because he had too much to protect. And then I found the box. The same wooden box he always kept locked. The one I used to ask about as a kid. The one he always moved when I got too curious. It sat underneath the bed, untouched, waiting. I held it in my hands, feeling the weight, literal and emotional. And something inside me shifted. This wasn't just a box. It was the final key to who he was, to what he built, to why he hid everything. And as I prepared to open it, I knew one thing. Whatever was inside would not only change how I saw my father, but how I saw myself. Holding that wooden box in my hands felt like holding a heartbeat, not mine, but his. It wasn't heavy because of its contents. It was heavy because of everything it represented. All the silence, all the years, all the things he never said. The box was small, carved by hand, smooth on the edges from years of being handled. And the strange part, it wasn't locked anymore. The lock was still there, but the latch had been left open, almost as if he wanted to make sure I would find it the moment I stepped into that room again. My breath trembled as I lifted the lid, feeling the gravity of a truth that had waited years for this exact moment. Inside, everything was meticulously organized: folders, envelopes, keys, a passport, a photograph, and documents. So many documents. But what caught my attention first was the envelope on top, with my name written in his handwriting. That handwriting that always felt like home. I didn't open it yet. I couldn't. Not before understanding the rest. The box smelled faintly of cedar, and the moment I touched the first stack of papers, I felt a chill go through my body. This wasn't just financial information. It wasn't just investments. It was something much deeper. I pulled out the first folder and opened it slowly. Inside were scanned documents, certifications, stamped papers, and names, many names. Names of people I had never met, names connected to companies I'd never heard of, names that appeared again and again in different contexts. Some were highlighted, others circled, and next to a few of them, in my father's careful handwriting, were notes like reliable, keep distance, trusted, dangerous, dangerous. That one word made my throat tighten. Why would my father need to warn himself, or me, about dangerous people? I kept digging. Some documents were financial, some were legal, some were something else. There were letters written in languages I didn't recognize, receipts from countries he had never told me he visited, bank seals from institutions that weren't even national. And at the bottom of the stack, tucked between two envelopes, I found something that made my hands go cold. A photo. A picture of my father standing beside two men in suits I didn't recognize. But the way they stood, the way they looked at the camera, the discreet insignia on one of their jackets, something about them screamed authority. Not the public kind, the private kind, the kind that works behind closed doors. I had to sit down. My knees felt weak. My father hadn't just been wealthy. He hadn't just been strategic. He had been involved in something complex, something global, something he had never wanted me to be part of while he was alive. And now, whether I was ready or not, I held the box that connected me directly to his hidden world. At the bottom of the box, I found a smaller envelope labeled simply, "If she ever needs it." My breath got stuck in my chest. She, me. Every step of my life, every sacrifice he made, every silence he kept, it all pointed to this moment. This wasn't wealth. This wasn't inheritance. This was protection, carefully built, layer by layer, secret by secret. When I finally gathered the courage to open the envelope with my name on it, my hands were shaking. Inside, there wasn't a long letter, just a few lines. But those few lines changed everything. If you are reading this, it means life has pushed you harder than I ever wanted for you. You are stronger than you think. Trust yourself. Trust what I taught you. And do not trust everyone who comes close to you now. I love you. Dad, I cried. Not softly, deeply. The sound of a truth finally finding its way home. And as I wiped my tears, one thing became clear. Opening that box wasn't the end of a mystery. It was only the beginning. My father had built a world in silence, and now I had to decide whether I was ready to step into it. For days after opening that wooden box, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had stepped into something bigger than myself, something my father spent his entire life trying to control, contain, and shield me from. I kept rereading the documents, the notes, the highlighted names, trying to make sense of the fragments he'd left behind. But the more I learned, the more one truth became painfully obvious. My father's fortune wasn't just money, it was responsibility, and responsibility always comes with danger. I started noticing details in the documents that made my stomach twist. coded numbers, encrypted references, mentions of international entities, and strange footnotes that looked like warnings rather than commentary. My father wasn't careless. Every sentence, every signature, every instruction had a purpose. He knew exactly who might try to get close once he was gone. He even anticipated betrayals, and the realization hit hard. People like my husband weren't accidents. People like him existed everywhere. People who only value you when you have something they want. And for the first time, I understood exactly why my father hid his wealth from the world, and from me. As I dug deeper into the documents, I found references to transactions that spanned decades. Some were ordinary investments, others weren't. There were coded memos about red zones, restricted channels, and external threats, words that had no place in a normal life, words that made me realize my father hadn't just been wealthy. He had been connected to systems that expected discretion, intelligence, and caution, systems that didn't forgive mistakes, systems where money wasn't simply money, it was leverage, and leverage, in the wrong hands, could destroy everything. What terrified me most wasn't the money itself. It was the ripple effect it created. I started receiving messages from distant relatives who had never spoken to me before. Old acquaintances suddenly resurfaced, pretending to care about my well-being. Even strangers began trying to connect with me online, some claiming to have known my father, others pretending to offer help. But their timing was too convenient, too calculated. Suddenly, I understood the warning in my father's letter. Do not trust everyone who comes close to you now. And he was right. People don't show their true colors when you're struggling. They show them when they think you have something to offer. My father had known this long before I ever could. Sitting in the living room of his old house, surrounded by documents that held more power than I was ready to handle, I felt a strange mixture of fear and determination. My father had navigated these waters alone, not because he wanted to, but because he needed to. And now, without him, I had to choose whether I would step into his world fully or walk away and pretend none of this existed. But deep inside, I already knew the answer. This wasn't something I could unsee. This wasn't something I could ignore. This was part of who I was now. As night fell and the house grew quiet, I held his photo in my hands, the one I found inside the wooden box. I looked into his eyes, trying to understand the weight he carried all those years. And for the first time, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel lost. I felt prepared, not because I knew everything, but because I finally understood why he hid everything. He wasn't protecting the money from the world. He was protecting me from the world that comes with it. And as I sat there, surrounded by the echoes of his silence, I realized that the journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but it was necessary, because the final truth, the one my father tried the hardest to keep hidden, was the truth I was about to uncover next. The deeper I went into my father's documents, the more I realized that everything, every number, every note, every warning was guiding me somewhere. It wasn't random. It wasn't accidental. It was intentional. And that intention came into focus the moment I found the last envelope. It was buried beneath layers of documents inside the wooden box, sealed with a stamp I didn't recognize and addressed in a way that made my heart stop for a second. For when she is ready, not if, when. My father knew I would reach this moment. He believed in my strength long before I ever did myself. I held the envelope carefully, almost fearfully. My hands trembled, not because I feared the truth, but because I felt the weight of everything leading to it. This wasn't just another note or another clue. This was the final piece, the last part of a puzzle my father had built in silence for decades. When I opened it, I found several pages filled with his handwriting. But this time, it wasn't strategy or financial guidance or warnings. It was him, his voice, his heart, the father I knew and the man I didn't, finally speaking as one. He explained that the fortune I'd discovered wasn't earned through luck or inheritance. It had taken him decades of discipline, intelligence, and sacrifice. He built everything quietly because the world he dealt with was unpredictable, dangerous at times. A world where silence wasn't secrecy, it was safety. He never told me because he wanted me to grow without fear, without pressure, without being defined by wealth. I didn't yet understand. He wanted me to build character before stepping into opportunity. And the part that broke me the most was this. If you are reading this, it means life has hurt you. But pain is the moment when your true strength finally emerges. He left instructions, not about the money itself, but about me. He told me to study, to learn how to manage the empire he built, to be cautious with new relationships, to trust patterns, not promises, to value people who love without knowing what I have, not the ones who come back when they think there's something to gain. Every sentence felt like a hand on my shoulder, guiding me through the fog of my own rebirth. At the bottom of the letter, he left me coordinates, real coordinates, a location, my breath caught in my chest. It wasn't the house, it wasn't the bank, it was somewhere else. Somewhere he wanted me to go only when I was strong enough to handle the next part of the truth. I stared at the numbers for a long time, feeling a mix of fear, curiosity, and destiny settling into my bones. Whatever waited for me there, it was part of the story he couldn't tell while he was alive. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back inside the envelope. The room felt different now, heavier with meaning, lighter with clarity. I looked around, realizing that this wasn't an ending. This wasn't closure. This was a beginning disguised as a revelation. A beginning my father had crafted step by step, knowing that one day I would stand exactly where I was, ready to continue what he started. As I closed the wooden box and held it against my chest, a deep certainty washed over me. My life wasn't breaking apart, it was unfolding. My father hadn't left me money, he had left me a mission. A legacy built not on wealth, but on strength, wisdom, and silent protection. And as I prepared to follow the coordinates he left behind, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. I wasn't afraid, I was ready. When I look back at everything I lived, from the moment my husband threw me out to the night I discovered who my father truly was, I realized something I never understood before. Sometimes life breaks you so it can rebuild you. Sometimes the ground needs to collapse beneath your feet so you can finally walk on solid earth again. I thought losing my home, my marriage, and my sense of direction was the end of everything, but it was only the beginning. A beginning my father prepared long before I ever knew I would need it. And now I want to ask you something only you can answer. What pain in your life is actually trying to push you toward a new version of yourself? Because pain is rarely the end. Most of the time, it's a door. And I had to hit rock bottom to find the door my father left for me. Understanding his inheritance changed more than my financial reality. It changed my identity. It made me see that I am not defined by who left me, by who underestimated me, or by the storms I've survived. I am defined by the strength I found when I had every reason to give up. And you? Yes, you watching this. You have that strength too. Maybe you don't see it yet. Maybe life hasn't forced it out of you the way it did with me, but it's there. And the moment you decide to step into it, everything changes. So tell me, what part of my story touched you the most? What do you feel you need to change from today forward? I genuinely want to know. Leave a comment. Sometimes transformation begins when we finally speak out loud what we've been afraid to admit even to ourselves. And before you go, let me ask you for something important. If this story stirred something inside you, hope, strength, clarity, or even the courage to start again, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and turn on notifications. Not just to support the channel, but so you don't miss the next stories, the next lessons, the next truths we uncover together. Thank you for staying with me until the end. Thank you for listening to my journey. And thank you for allowing my father's legacy and my rebirth to reach you today. Remember this, sometimes the door life slams in your face is the same door that leads you to everything you were always meant to become.